Boing. Holy crap. Hey guys, our video this week is on the True Runes of the Suikoden series. We'll be going over what they are, why they're important to the Suikoden universe, how many there are, and what they can do.
Alright, so first things first. In Suikoden, all of magic, from casting spells to enchanting weapons and everything in between, is accomplished through the use of items called runes. A rune is a magical symbol that imbues the bearer with specific types of power, and is either ensorcelled into a weapon or imbued into a living being, generally on one of the hands or the head. Wanna run real fast? Use a rune! Wanna shoot fire at your enemies? Use a rune! Wanna teleport across the countryside? Use a rune! The true runes are more powerful runes from which all other runes are said to have been derived, or born, and represent fundamental aspects of reality. Examples include life and death, balance, redemption, and the influence of the sun and the moon, just to name a few. As items considered to be related to aspects of creation, the true runes are involved in the creation story within the Suikoverse. That creation story goes as follows. In the beginning, all that existed was darkness. For a long, long time, darkness lived in solitude, growing ever so lonely. Out of sorrow and despair, darkness shed a tear. From the tear were born two brothers, Sword and Shield. Sword claimed it could cut through all that exists. Shield claimed itself impenetrable. Thus the conflict was born, a truly vicious conflict, lasting 7 days and 7 nights. In the end, Sword breached Shield, and Shield shattered Sword. Pieces of Sword rained down to make the sky. Pieces of Shield rained down to make the ground. Stars were created from the sparks of that battle. The 27 gems adorning Sword and Shield transformed into the 27 true runes, and thus began the world as we know it.
A true rune carries tremendous power, and, as if taking Uncle Ben's famous words as their life's motto, are tremendous burdens. In addition to each of the true rune's individual abilities, there are certain boons that are usually accepted as coming along with the bearing of any true rune, such as increased longevity and or agelessness, immunity to diseases, and etc. Although not every true rune has been definitively shown to possess such traits, it is a commonly held belief in universe that bearing a true rune does grant these benefits and others. It should also be noted that contrary to regular runes, of which a person can bear as many as 3, say 3 fire runes, 2 lightning runes and a water rune, etc., a single person can bear only 1 true rune at any given time, and they are often fairly picky about who they allow to wield themselves. Yes, that's right, on top of everything else, these hyper-powerful magical artifacts are sentient, and while they have never been shown to speak directly to a bearer, or anyone else, barring manifestations which we'll get to later, they are always influencing their bearer, as well as those around them, in order to accomplish their own agendas and fulfill their needs. Thus, the heavy burden. As while a true rune will grant the owner or host incredible power, that person will, at least in small ways, almost always play a role in the larger chess game for the world.
Of the 27 true runes in existence, 18 have been revealed over the course of the Suikoden game series, generally with 1 true rune being wielded by the protagonist, at least 1 by the major antagonist, and possibly a few others scattered about here and there on either side of the conflict. We have divided these runes into 3 subcategories. Standard true runes, those true runes that have powers that have largely been shown, recognized, and documented. Split runes, true runes that have literally been separated, and usually have, or are inferred to have, lesser powers in their separated state than they possessed when whole. And unexplained runes, the true runes that have been identified as such, but with powers that have not been concretely identified. We're going to go over the standard runes first.
First up on our list of runes is the Beast Rune, a rune embodying the aspects of animalistic rage and passion. This rune has been shown to be one of the runes that have the ability to create a fully fledged manifestation of itself. It's been theorized that all runes have this capacity, but only a handful have ever been shown to do so, and personal manifestation is probably what this rune is best known for. Well, that and blood sacrifices, because apparently in order to activate this rune, it demands blood. In the game where it makes an appearance, the Beast Rune has numerous sacrifices made to it, in order to empower it as a weapon of war. The result was that it released numerous conjured wolf creatures to fight its enemies, you the player, as well as itself manifesting as a massive, magical, two-headed wolf in order to do battle. Once defeated, the beast rune disappeared and hasn't been seen or heard from since.
Next we have the Dragon Rune. This rune's capabilities are as simple as they are staggering, as the Dragon Rune is apparently the only thing that allows dragons to exist in the world of Suikoden. Literally. If the bearer of the Dragon Rune dies and the Dragon Rune is allowed to fall dormant, all dragons in the world would die. We know because of the Gate Rune, which we'll discuss later, that other worlds exist, specifically the world to which monsters are native, and we also know that some dragons have been shown creating portals to a world of wings and scales. So it seems likely that the dragons too aren't native to the Suikoden world. But how or why exactly the Dragon Rune is linked to their lives, and possibly to the existence of the world of wings and scales itself, is unknown. Also, the wielder of the Dragon Rune can exert control and dominion over dragons, so that's neat.
Then there's the Moon Rune, embodying both destruction and compassion. This is the first rune on our list to qualify as a cursed rune. While all true runes, including this one, grant the bearers incredible power, some, like the Moon Rune, also carry a heavier than normal price to wield that power. The Moon Rune turns its bearer into a vampire, granting the bearer incredible resistances to damage, long life, and of course, bloodlust. That bloodlust is where the curse kicks in, for while the bearer of the Moon Rune can sire other vampires who all function essentially as one might expect, needing to drink blood, harmed by daylight, etc., the bearer of the Moon Rune is actually immune to most normal vampire weaknesses, things like sunlight and religious symbols. However, upon acquiring the Moon Rune, the rune overpowers the wielder with an insatiable bloodlust, at least until such time as the bearer can come to master the rune, converting it into its compassion phase, granting all of the power but none of the cursed side effects. This rune was originally held by a woman named Sierra McCain, a kind-hearted, largely non-violent woman, before it was stolen and held for a number of years by Necklord, who is basically Suikoden's Dracula. It should also be noted that while generally a non-violent personality, Sierra was inflicted with her rune-imposed lust for blood for many, many years, perhaps centuries, before she was able to master the rune enough for it to enter the compassion stage. Over the course of the games, the players do eventually help Sierra regain the Moon Rune, and she presumably carries it to this day, as she was already 800 plus years old by the time the players meet her.
The Night Rune is one of the more interesting runes, not least because of its obvious relation to the Moon Rune. This rune embodies the powers of the night, and, in a manner similar to the Dragon Rune, is what allows creatures of the night, such as zombies, skeletons, and yes, vampires, to exist. This is fascinating to us because while some true runes are interrelated, no true rune can be spawned from another rune like the normal runes were. And yet, the Moon Rune's primary ability, if not its representative natures, are clearly subservient to the Night Rune's powers. In addition to its allowing undead to exist, the Night Rune grants the wielder power over the undead. While it is never shown to grant the wielder the power to control the creatures of the night, it is capable of destroying even those undead that would be otherwise unkillable, such as the aforementioned Necklord while he possessed the Moon Rune. The last and arguably least important, but most interesting aspect of the Night Rune is that it is currently taken up the form of a sentient sword. Sources disagree on whether the rune is simply embedded into the sword or whether the sword is itself the Night Rune, although references surrounding the Sun Rune, which we'll get to later, indicate that the sword itself is most likely the Night Rune incarnate. Either way, though, the Night Rune represents the most colorful manifestation of all the true runes, calling itself the Star Dragon Sword or Zodiac Sword depending upon the translation. The Night Rune is a fully sentient sword capable of animating itself, speaking, and even using the magic within its domain, which apparently includes time travel somehow, though that may have been the interaction of the Night Rune and the Soul Eater Rune, but even so, they seem to be stretching their powers and domains in order to accomplish time travel. The Zodiac Sword also has an enormous ego, and was last seen being wielded by Edge, after Victor, who carried the sword twice and got rid of it the first time because he was tired of its attitude, bequeathed the blade to the young swordsman, who eventually went off in search of someone or something the Night Rune considered an enemy.
The Rune of Life and Death, more often simply called the Soul Eater Rune, is another cursed rune. My favorite of the Suikoden runes, and as the name implies, it grants the wielder power over life and death. What this means in practice is that the rune gives the wielder powers of immense lethality to bring to bear against his or her foes. All of its abilities, as shown in the games, deal incredible amounts of damage. It is also one of the runes that has specifically been shown to grant its bearer agelessness. But alas, it carries a heavy curse, for while the bearer is effectively immortal, the Soul Eater rune earns its moniker by being hungry for the souls of those closest to the bearer. Some with knowledge of the Soul Eater rune believe that the rune manipulates events, or even fate itself, to draw its wielder's closest allies into danger, so that they may die and the rune may feast on their fallen souls. The only bright side to this is that some have speculated that the souls devoured by the rune are not lost, but live on in either the rune or the wielder of the rune. For, whatever that's worth. This rune was last seen being wielded by the protagonist of the first Suikoden game, after having Gremio brought back to life, a close friend of his who had been eaten by the Soul Eater's machinations. The two left their other allies to go off and have more adventures. Presumably, he carries the rune to this day. Of the cursed runes shown in this game, this is the only rune that does not appear to possess some form of uncursed mode, as opposed to, say, the Moon Rune, as previously mentioned.
The Rune of Punishment is the next on our list, and is my favorite Suikoden rune. This rune apparently embodies atonement and forgiveness, and is also a cursed rune. It is the most blatantly parasitic of all the runes, as the Rune of Punishment grants its wielder tremendous destructive power, arguably more power than any other rune in the games, at the cost of the wielder's own life force. Though it should be noted it is not statistically the most powerful, just arguably one of the most deadly in terms of the lore. This give and take of power and life has so far universally resulted in the death of the Rune of Punishment's wielders, with the rune's then current bearer being reduced to ash, before the rune jumps to the nearest available host within range. We know there is a range because at one point one of the rune's bearers died, isolated deep in some ruin, and the rune laid dormant for years before another human being wandered close enough to be caught within its web. Like the Soul Eater rune, the Rune of Punishment is known to be dangerous to friend and foe alike, as, without proper control, its destructive powers can easily rampage indiscriminately across the battlefield. While all true runes have great power and as such have sway on the plot of the various Suikoden games, the Rune of Punishment is one of only a handful of true runes that actually drive the entirety of its game's plot. Several hosts before the player gets a hold of the Rune of Punishment, a man by the name of Graham Cray received the rune after watching his son, in self-defense, wipe out an entire village, and the vagabonds attacking it. The child was young and did not survive the use of the rune, so it transferred to the only living survivor, the boy's father, Cray. Having witnessed his son's death, Cray searched feverishly for any manner or method of removing the Rune of Punishment's curse. When he could find none, he instead removed his arm, severing the rune from him and sending it off to search for another host. Unfortunately for the world, however, Cray eventually developed a craving for the power of the rune he'd tossed aside, and orchestrated an entire war, and thus the primary crux of Suikoden 4's plot, in an effort to smoke out the current bearer of the rune, and reacquire its powers, as the rune always seemed to be able to draw its bearer into danger so that it could be used. Cray would ultimately fail, and ironically, the player would be successful in shifting the rune into its forgiveness phase, allowing him to wield the Rune of Punishment's destructive power without sacrificing his life in the process, much like Sierra with the Moon Rune, which had been Cray's entire original goal. Interestingly, the Rune of Punishment is presumed to have the same baseline true rune abilities as the others, such as granting agelessness, but no documented wielder of the rune has lived long enough to test that theory. And while it's presumed that Suikoden 4's protagonist is still alive somewhere, if he has been rendered ageless, all we really know is that the Rune of Punishment was last seen in his possession following the events of the game.
The Sovereign Rune is an interesting rune. It has made only one appearance in the games, and we don't mean it only appeared in one game, we really mean it appeared only once, in the one game in which it makes an appearance. The Sovereign Rune is shown to have two abilities. Whether or not it has others is unknown, but frankly, any rune could be proud to have the powers of the Sovereign Rune. Its primary ability is that it makes the bearer completely immune to magic. As in, immune to the effects of all runes, including other true runes. So the bearer of this rune can look at any true rune wielder, movers of nations that they are, and just go, nah, when that true rune's power is brought to bear against whomever is using the Sovereign Rune. Additionally, it allows the wielder to manifest the Sovereign Rune in the form of a great three-headed dragon called the Golden Hydra, which, while not itself immune to magic, is still heavily resistant to all magics, immune to some forms of magic, and able to deal and withstand incredible amounts of damage, not to mention heal itself and revive fallen heads. If all of that sounds crazy, know that the Golden Hydra is the final boss of Suikoden 1. Another interesting thing about the Sovereign Rune is that it is an heirloom, as in passed from one generation to another, belonging to the royal Rune family of one of Suikoden's many empires. A fact we find interesting considering that conventional wisdom holds that a true rune bearer cannot die of old age. Now, it should be noted that in Suikoden 1, the Sovereign Rune is embedded in the Dragon King sword, another royal heirloom, and if the rune has been embedded in the sword for several generations, it is possible that that is the reason why the Sovereign Rune bearers can still die of old age despite being able to wield the rune's power, but that's all entirely conjecture. Another aspect of this rune left to conjecture is what became of it, as, after the players defeat the manifested Sovereign Rune, Emperor Ragnar, its bearer, makes a speech before leaping off of a balcony located on the top of his royal castle, taking Windy, bearer of one of the split runes we'll talk about later, with him. Neither the Sovereign Rune's owner, the rune itself, Windy, or her rune are ever heard from again, so their whereabouts and conditions are unknown, though it should be noted that the two characters were originally labeled as dead and changed to unknown later, presumably in order to open up the possibility of future uses for their characters.
The final runes on our standard list are the true Earth, Wind, Fire, Water, and Lightning runes, each of which is the most powerful rune of its type, able to manipulate the various elements, and as the common elemental runes are by far the most common runes, these true runes are also the most prolific of the true runes, easily siring half to 3/4 of the more common runes in existence throughout the Suikoverse. With one possible exception, these runes are all fairly self-explanatory, granting the bearers significant power over whatever element the rune controls, fire, water, etc. The most interesting thing about these runes are what we learn about the rest of the true runes as a result of Suikoden 3, the game in which the 5 elemental runes converge. In Suikoden 3, Luck, the bearer of the true Wind rune, was bound to the rune through a process that was inferred to be unnatural and which went awry. As a result, his spirit was mingled with the true Wind rune, which eventually allowed access to the memories of the rune, which included what Luck interpreted as a vision of the future. A terrible, stagnant, desolate future ruled by order. During the course of the Suikoden series, a small handful of other characters are shown to be able to see a presumed future through their true runes, but Luck, after receiving these visions, came to the conclusion that the empty future was the result of the 27 true runes reuniting, and as such, if he could destroy his true Wind rune, he could avert that future. Thus began the impetus for Suikoden 3. We also discover from this game that the true runes are so difficult to destroy that they're effectively indestructible, but it was theorized that if a true rune could be destroyed, that the result would be a level of destruction so great that entire continents could be leveled. As such, the player and their forces unite to stop Luck and his plans, which involved using an ancient magical machine and the other 4 true elemental runes in an effort to destroy his true Wind rune. The locations and bearers of the various true elemental runes at the end of the game depend on the player's choices, with the exception of the true Wind rune, which is presumed to remain wielderless after Luck's presumed demise.
And that's all the standard true runes in the Suikoverse. There is still a lot of information to go over for the split and unexplained runes, mostly the split runes, obviously, so we're splitting this topic into 2 videos. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and come back next week for part 2. If you have any feedback, like whether you like or dislike multi-part lore videos, let us know in the comments down below. And if you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore or let's play, go ahead and hit subscribe.
In the meantime, this has been Two Men and a Mic, signing off. Hey guys, you can click the link in the left for our last lore video.
You can click the link on the right for our last Let's Play.
And right here in the middle, that orb, you can hit that to subscribe.
Also, ring the bell if you want to be notified when we post a new video.
This is Two Men and a Mic. Thanks for watching.